Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stack of Days podcast, where we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety from within the BIPOC community. I'm your host, Ray Donovan. I'm very excited to be here for the first episode of season 2 of the podcast. Have had such a great experience working, on this project over the course of the last year. And for those who are meeting me for the first time, I'll give you a little bit of my backstory and how the podcast came to be, and then also just a little bit about what you can expect for season 2. Those of you who are not meeting me for the first time, it's nice to see you. As you know, if you've been following the show, you've been listening to the show, season 1, we've been exclusively an audio podcast for the most part. The one kind of new addition to this season is the fact that we're going to be moving the community over to YouTube. So the podcast will still be available wherever you find your podcast, so whether that's Apple or Spotify or Amazon, you'll be able to catch us there. But every week, every Wednesday, you'll be able to find us right here, on YouTube as well. For those who are meeting me for the first time, like I said, my name is Ray. Started this podcast in early 2023. And really, this is kind of it has been a labor of love of mine that I've been working on, for over a year, as a space where, people of color could come to look for similarities in others who look like them, who sound like them, as they pursue their own experience and journey of sobriety. And to kind of give you a little bit of sense of of my own personal story, and you can listen to it in more detail if you want to go back to episode 1, which is titled My Why. That's available in audio format. But to kind of root you a little bit in my story, and why I started this podcast in the first place, is I had been drinking for decades of my life. I started really early on. I was probably about 13 or 14 years old when I first had my first introduction and experience with alcohol. And I was a young black man growing up in Canada, in Montreal, really just trying to figure out who I was. I grew up in an environment where we moved around a fair amount. I grew up in an environment where I was a product of of divorce at a really young age. And I think that, initially what alcohol served was, really a crutch for me to be more comfortable in my own skin. And, and I found that in a community outside of my home who just happened to drink and party. And I think for me at that age, you know, yes, I was doing what everybody else was doing, but I think it meant something different for me at the time. It really was an escape mechanism and a coping mechanism for, number one, just to make me feel more comfortable in my own skin, but also an opportunity for me to numb myself, from some things that were happening, in my home environment. And to kind of just fast forward alcohol ended up meaning different things to me at different times over the course of my relationship with it. So what started as really, an opportunity for me to loosen up, at certain points in my life, gave me, the mental fortitude to push through anxieties, or gave me an opportunity to meet new friend groups as I grew and developed and moved away from Canada to the US and started going to college, and became a professional and all of those things. The one consistent that kind of strung all of those life experiences together is that I always kind of, had alcohol to lean on. Um, and really at a certain point, there wasn't very much that I would do where I wasn't drinking. So I would, drink to feel comfortable in, intimacy. I would drink to feel comfortable having challenging conversations. I would drink for celebration. I would drink, during, points of challenge. I would drink to relax. My profession ended up, kind of moving into an area where that was very common. I worked in the service industry, and for any of those of you out there who've worked in the service industry, there's a lot of drinking that takes place in that space. So, never, for the most part, do I think that, from the outside looking in, did I have an overt problem? I think that those who are closest to me probably questioned my behavior, and certainly at a certain point, I started questioning it for myself. And it peaked a few times. It peaked a few times of note where I had to take a hard look and say, you certainly have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. You certainly need to readdress this issue that you have and try to figure out a way to manage it. So, early on when I decided that, I had a problem, my go-to solve for that problem was not abstinence, was not, removing alcohol from my life, was not trying to do the work behind the alcohol to understand, my why behind drinking and why it had become so commonplace and really, something that I couldn't live without. I mean, it got to a point where, every day I was drinking, and my drink of choice was wine. And I had gone from malt liquor in my early days to to liquor to wine as I thought I was becoming more refined. But in any case, fast forward to September 2021, had a pretty elaborate blowout personally that caused me to have a strong look at my relationship. And again, if you want to know the details of that, you can always go back to season 1 and listen to episode 1, My Why, where I get into a little bit more detail around what transpired. But ultimately, I had to take a hard look at my relationship and saw, the writing on the wall. I saw that my family was life was in jeopardy. I saw that, I might lose my home, I might lose my career that I've, spent so much, blood, sweat, and tears to build. And I figured if I don't do something differently now, I'm going to, seriously regret it, or potentially, even end up dead. I mean, there's a lot of unintended consequences, and that happen when, you're inebriated consistently. And I just had to do something differently. So I didn't pursue a traditional program, i.e., like an Alcoholics Anonymous or Smart Recovery. I kind of just hodgepodged my own program together. So my thought process was, how do I remove a lot of these negative behaviors, negative substances, from my life, and then start replacing that with more positive behaviors. So an example of that would be, in me not drinking in the evenings, for example, as a wind down, I started, spending more time focusing on my physical health. So I started working out more, for example. But before all of that, I think my first step was I went to my general practitioner. I had medication prescribed to me to wean me off of the cravings. I started seeking out therapy to really start, etching away at some of the foundational kind of underlined issues that I felt, inside of me. And I'm still in therapy to this day. Um, and then there were some more kind of day-to-day tactical pieces, like, the physical health, aspect. And also, I read a lot of Quit Lit. And in addition to Quit Lit, I listened to a lot of podcasts, everything from Recovery Elevator to This Naked Mind to Recovery Happy Hour. Uh, and there were probably a handful of others that I listened to as well. And there's certainly more today, 2 years post, my, beginning my sobriety journey, that have hit, that I still listen to as a core tenet of, of my recovery. But in all of that, I probably listened to hundreds, if not thousands, of episodes when it comes to recovery. And while I found that all of these stories from folks who had walked this line, there were a lot of similarities in the stories. I also recognized there were some pretty glaring dissimilarities between me and some of the folks who were sharing their journeys, primarily the fact that very seldom did I find people of color who are vulnerable and willing to share their stories. Now there were one or two examples of that on some of the various podcasts that I'd listened to, but there wasn't a one single kind of go-to place that I can check in with on a weekly basis, on a weekly basis, where I was seeing people who looked like me, where I was hearing people who sounded like me, who were really thriving and succeeding in their journey of recovery, in their journey of getting over this addiction to alcohol, their substance use disorder. So I said to myself, let me create something that is ultimately what I'm looking for. And that's how Stacking Days was born. It was born out of this necessity of mine to see other people of color talk about their struggles, but more importantly, talk about their bridge of from their struggles to this kind of new way of living. And you'll hear a lot of folks talk about where they've come from, and there's a huge spectrum, when it comes to where folks sat. You have folks who have hit their absolute rock bottom, people who've been on their deathbed, folks who've just decided that they needed to do something differently because alcohol wasn't serving them anymore. They were sick and tired of being sick and tired. There's a huge spectrum, but I wanted to capture that on this podcast because just like the at least the black diaspora, for example, like, being colored is not a monolith. There are so many variations and differences when it comes to all of us as individuals. But again, we can see those similarities in our stories and hopefully use those similarities as fuel for our own journeys to fortify us in making those challenging kind of behavioral decisions, life changes, and moves on a daily basis as we pursue our own journeys of healing, our own journeys of growth, in terms of sobriety. So, long and short, that's really my journey in pursuing, freedom from alcohol. That's my journey in developing, this creative outlet to bring these really uplifting, motivational, and inspiring stories from individuals that, quite frankly, have just made me a better person in just being able to speak to them for 45 minutes to an hour. So ultimately, what I wanted to do is bring that to you guys, to the listeners. Uh, the reason why we're moving over into a video format, an additional format for season 2, is that when it comes to the conversation around representation, ultimately, I felt as though that something was being lost in a lot of these stories because all we were able to do was listen to these individuals tell their stories and give us some guidance on how they've pursued their journeys. And because we were missing the quite literally the visual representation of them, the fact that they are proud people of color was, in my opinion, somewhat lost in the platform of audio exclusive. So for that reason, we wanted to make sure that we had a video component to the show and bring it to YouTube. So not only can you listen to the shows, but you can also see the dialogue. You can see these people. You can see, what I see when I have conversations with these folks and recognize that a lot of the pain that they've fought through and that maybe even to this day have to fight through every once in a while because life is never perfect, right? That it's real, and they're succeeding in their efforts to be able to move one day at a time, one step at a time. So really excited about the prospect that season 2 is going to be on YouTube. Um, in addition to that, I'm just really excited about the guests that we have come up. I'm releasing this introduction episode, having already had probably several months worth of conversations that we're going to be releasing to you guys over the next month and a half, 2 months. So just really excited about the fact that there is a huge community of folks that not only could benefit from what we're going to be providing on the Second Days podcast, but there's a huge community of folks that are just so generous with their time and so generous with their vulnerability, where they're willing to tap into that because they see the value in it for the broader recovery community. So I'm really excited about the prospect of continuing to grow this project. Ultimately, I want to hear from the audience. I want to hear what you guys want to hear more of, what you want to see more of. And and at the end of the day, this is also therapeutic for me to be able to have these conversations. So expect us to be coming to you every week on Wednesday. Again, you can catch the show on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, on Amazon, wherever else you get it. Again, it's going to be here on YouTube. And yeah, I just hope that you guys continue to come along for the journey. And for those who are just kind of coming into it for this first time, welcome into the space. It's just as much your space as it is mine, as it is our guest. So feel free to be very vocal about how you feel as though it should be kind of curated to support you on your wellness journey. So, with all that being said, really looking forward to continuing to do this with you guys. Looking forward to corresponding with you on social. And then more importantly, like, if you're out there and you want to share your story, let me know. I'd be happy to have you on. I'd be happy to chat with you about, what you want to bring to this conversation, because I think that it is dynamic. The Stacking Days podcast is not a dogmatic podcast where you kind of subscribe to any one, method of pursuing your sobriety. So, the more that we can, put in and add into the conversation, I think that the healthier, we'll all be in having that conversation. So, with all that being said, and I look forward to being with you guys over the next season. Thank you guys for tuning in who have tuned in the past. And again, for those who are, just finding us for the first time, welcome. Go back listening to episodes 1 through 25 and let me know what you think. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next week. We'll be releasing our first episode of season 2 with our first amazing guest. And until then, I hope that you guys can enjoy the ride and continue to be well. And we'll see you soon. All right. Thanks a lot. Talk soon. Bye. I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices in healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.